Hello and welcome to the short Vort on Parshas Behaaloscha and Shavuos. The title of this week's short Vort is "You Gotta Love Those In-Laws," the connection between Behaaloscha and Shavuos. So in Chamishi we have what is essentially a miracle that a son-in-law, Moshe Rabbeinu, wants his father-in-law to stay longer. But maybe it's not such a miracle because he didn't ask his mother-in-law to stay. And so it says that Moshe told his chova of his father-in-law, who had a number of names. There's also Ru'uel, and Kani, and Yisro, and Yeser. And Moshe says, we're about to enter the place that God had promised us and will do for us good, therefore stay with us. But Yisro, his father-in-law, says, Lo elech, I will not go, ki el artziv el moladti elech, I'm going to return home to Midjan. So Moshe Rabbeinu wanted him to stay, and he says, "Vayom al na tazovu osanu." Al na, do not please. Al is a kind of a lesson of commandment. Na is a language of bakasha, of request. Don't leave us. Ki al ken yadata chanosenu bamidbar, because you know how we camped in the desert. You were with us by the miracles. Vayisa lanu le'inayim, and you will be with us as eyes. So the Aznayim LaTorah, Zalman Zorotskin. So he does an analysis on Pasuk Lamed Aleph where it says Al na tazovu sanu. That al is two different languages. One is a commandment of al, and na is a vakasha, is a language of request. So if you're going to do a language, if you're going to do both of them, at least you should do the request first, and then if your request is turned down, then you use the power of a command. But don't start with the command, because once you start that way, you can't go back and say, oh, please. It just doesn't work. But, so what is the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu used this double language and in this sequence? So Moshe was responding to Yisro's replies, two of the reasons that Yisro gave for not wanting to stay and for wanting to go back. Basically, he says, I want to go back and be Megayer, my fellow people of Midjan. I want to show them the true God and have them convert to Judaism. So for this reason, Moshe's response was, no, you can't do that, because if you go back, people are going to get the wrong impression. Therefore, you have to stay, because if otherwise the Gentiles will say, oh, look, Midjan, he came, he saw, he wasn't impressed, therefore he left, and therefore they won't want to join Judaism and expand the greatness of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore he used the language then of the strong tone of Al. But the second reason that was given is that if you fear that your sons won't have parnasa because you won't be yoresh with all the other tribes because they're not a tribe, they don't get land in Israel, you don't have to worry about that either. Therefore, and here he says the language of nab, of bakasha, of please, because as he said, you will be to us as eyes. And one of the explanations, you'll give us advice, but also that we will make you a leader of the Sanhedrin, because you were so wise, you're Talmud Chacham, you gave us previous good advice. Therefore, if you're on the Sanhedrin, you'll be, and your family, will be supported by the public purse. And therefore, you won't have to worry, and therefore this was a request for him to say, why don't you, please come and join us, and we'll give you this, well, heitabnu, it will be good, and you'll be a leader for us. Yisro was a wise man, and Yisro came to a conclusion, and there's a machlokus of the commentaries whether or not Yisro himself stayed or what exactly happened then, but we do have sources that indicate that his son stayed, and they were given land in Yericho that was previously set aside for whichever Shevet would give their land towards the Binyan Habayas for the base of Mikdash. So we see that they did in fact stay, and Yisro had two plans with this. So firstly, he thought that the reason was for him to be Megayer as a counteraction for Moshe's saying, well, if you leave, people won't accept, they won't believe the favorable impression. So therefore he left his sons there. And if you leave your sons there, it's showing that you believe in this situation, in this guy, because you don't teach your sons falsehood. He wouldn't abandon his sons like that. And so even though he himself went back to actively be Megayer people, his sons were there as proof that he actually that Yisro believed in the miracles and the leadership of Hashem. And Yisro was also a second reason why he left his sons and he went back, because he was returning to land of Avodah Zarah, a land of idol worship. And if someone goes there, there's normally a risk that they can fall under the suasion of these idols and idol worshippers. But Yisro, what was he? He was the guy who he inspected and analyzed and tested every single religion and concluded that Judaism is the true religion. And therefore, for him, this was not a test to go back and try to be Megayah the people. But his sons didn't go through this process, and therefore his sons were more at risk, and therefore he did the wise thing, and he left his sons in a Makom Torah with the positive influence of staying with the Bnei Yisrael. So, just to connect it to Shavuos, we actually have Chamishi connected to Shavuos because we read Megillas Rus, and Rus is another case where we found that the in-laws, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, that they wanted to stay with each other. First, Rus wanted to stay, but her mother-in-law told her to leave, and in fact, Orpah went back. But here Rus says, no, I want to stay with my mother-in-law. Wherever you go, your religion, your place of living, everything I'm going to follow. So even though it seems to be that the in-laws are the ones who want to leave their son-in-laws, something to think about, but it does seem like there's an attachment of these, at least these specific son and daughter-in-law respectively, wanting to stay with the favorable impressions of their in-laws. So I guess there's hope in that regard. Have a wonderful Shavuos and a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you for listening.